Some stories begin with an argument. Some stories begin with a betrayal. But mine begins with a chair. Yes, just a chair placed in the coldest corner of the entire wedding hall, right next to the restroom door, where every time it opened, the smell of cleaning chemicals rushed out. A spot where people glance past you the way they glance past an obstacle. And what made my chest tighten wasn't the location of that chair, but the moment my own child saw me sitting there and then looked away, as if everything had been arranged exactly right. They belonged at the center, and I belonged at the edge. If any sentence below makes you pause, a sting in your throat, an old memory pulled back to the surface, or just a moment when you remember being placed in the wrong spot in your own family. Leave a single so I know you're here with me, and don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so that whenever a new story arrives, you'll be the first to receive it. Thank you for being here with me. Now, allow me to tell you my story. That afternoon, Lake Tahoe was unusually quiet, its surface flat like a deep blue sheet of glass reflecting the evening sky, folding itself behind the Sierra Nevada ridge. I stood by the cabin window, my hand resting on the steel coffee pot Eleanor left behind, listening to the wind threading through the pines behind the house, the scent of sap, the rustle of dry leaves, and the last gold light of day blended into the kind of stillness only those who have lived by the lake for decades can understand. This cabin, the one I built with my own hands over 40 years, still carried the smell of oak, still had the old table where Eleanor placed wildflowers every weekend, still let the metal wind chime ring softly whenever the night breeze slid across the porch. Only the woman whose smile warmed Nevada winters was missing. At 6:02 in the evening, Claire and Evan's black hybrid climbed the small slope leading to the cabin. Their headlights stretched into a long beam across the lake. I adjusted the wool scarf Eleanor knitted and stepped onto the porch to greet them. Claire stepped out first, long knit dress, posture straight, her eyes sweeping across the cabin as if assessing whether this place was presentable. Enough for someone she might want to impress. Evan followed, his white shirt pressed too perfectly not to have survived several rounds in front of a mirror. His first look went from my hiking boots up my old flannel shirt, then paused for exactly 2 seconds on the scarf over my shoulder. The last thing Eleanor knitted for me the year she passed. In his eyes I caught a flicker of judgment, small but sharp as the edge of a mountain stone. "Hi, Dad," Claire smiled, but it was thin as wet paper. "Hello, sweetheart. Evan?" I nodded. Evan raised one eyebrow slightly, the micro-expression of someone who thinks he's superior, but tries to appear polite. They rested a few minutes. Then we headed out for dinner, a meal that began with awkward silence. I ladled soup from the cast-iron pot, rosemary mixing with pine wood, into the kind of warmth that only a home with a soul can hold. Claire sat too straight, unnecessarily perfect. Evan glanced around like he was appraising every object in sight. "This cabin? It's still the same, sir?" Evan asked, voice neutral but not natural. "Dad prefers it this way," Claire cut in a bit too quickly. "Dad isn't the type to change things fast." The way she said it made the sentence sound like a flaw. I set my spoon down. "What did you two come here for? It's rare to drive almost 1 hour just for dinner." Claire looked at Evan. Evan slightly furrowed his brow. The signal for, "Let me speak." "Actually," Evan began, "we wanted to talk about the wedding, about the way you show up." "Show up?" I asked. Claire bit her lip. Evan looked at my shirt, then my hair, then said, "You dress a bit old, not the right upscale vibe." Claire cut in, small but loud enough for me to hear, "Bah, maybe don't talk about your old job. It sounds cheap." The wool scarf on my shoulder felt heavier. I still remember the day Claire was 10, proudly telling her whole class, "My dad designed an entire forest, and now the career I lived and breathed for was cheap." The Tahoe wind flicked the wind chime Eleanor once hung. Its thin chime sounded like a memory. "Who do you want me to pretend to be?" I asked softly. Claire avoided my gaze. "Not pretend. Just don't be too real. Say you're a consultant to sound nicer, to fit Evan's environment." Evan nodded slightly, another condescending micro-expression. "Just to keep things smooth, sir. Don't draw attention." I placed my hand on the table. "Smooth meaning what?" "Meaning no one should know I built half the resorts you two dream of spending a weekend in." Evan shrugged, tiny but unmistakable. Claire exhaled, her voice almost pleading. "Dad, please don't make this hard for me. This wedding is really important." She took my hand, but it was cold and tense, no longer the warm hand of the child who once hugged me whenever she feared the dark. "Claire, are you ashamed of me?" She pulled her hand back faster than manners allowed. "No, it's just... you don't understand Evan's level." "Level?" I looked at Evan. "And you think I embarrass you?" Evan whispered to Claire, but loud enough for me to hear. "I told you, if he shows up dressed like this at the wedding..." I didn't say anything else. I just listened to the cabin wood expand softly from the stove's heat. "I won't make trouble for anyone," I said, "but I won't become someone else just to please you." Evan muttered, "Just don't ruin the ceremony." The sentence was like a small blade, sharp and cold. They left the cabin once it was fully dark. Their tail lights cut a red streak across the mirror-still lake. I stood on the porch, holding the scarf Eleanor knitted, hearing night birds call across the pines. And right then, I knew. This was only the beginning. They had no idea that this cabin, this land, the entire forest behind it, had been placed into the Merrick Land Trust 7 years ago. They thought I was gentle, bendable, poor, outdated, past my time. They didn't know. My silence was for watching and preparing. That evening, the wind coming off the lake was colder than usual, but my heart was colder still. That night, Truckee was so cold you could see your breath in the stretch of warm yellow lights lining the main street. I parked my old Subaru Outback at the far end of the lot, where the Mercedes and Range Rovers sat in neat rows, like some kind of silent luxury exhibition. The sign of Truckee Skyline Steakhouse glowed against the dark wood exterior, a deliberate kind of elegance, warm light spilling through the windows and reflecting off the coats of guests walking in. I saw Claire and Evan at the entrance, talking with an older couple, probably Evan's parents. They dressed as if every thread on their bodies carried a story about status. When I walked closer, Claire turned first. Her smile tried to land on her face, but didn't reach her eyes. Evan adjusted his collar, the kind of adjustment people make right before judging someone. "Dad," Claire said, her voice just a bit too bright, "you made it. These are Evan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Collins." I extended my hand. "A pleasure." Mr. Collins shook it, but the pressure was half polite, half controlling. Mrs. Collins looked at my old blazer longer than necessary, then offered a smile as thin as a thread. Evan stepped in between the handshake, an invisible but very clear move. He wanted control of the situation. "Remember, sir," Evan murmured sharply, "if anyone asks tonight, just say you're an urban design consultant. Don't mention trees or landscapes or whatever." I looked straight into his eyes. "Consultant?" "Yes," Claire added immediately. "Sounds fancier, Dad." I didn't answer, just opened the restaurant door so they could walk in first. Inside, Skyline Steakhouse was exactly the kind of place built so people like the Collins family feel they're in the correct tier of society. Vaulted wooden ceilings, European pendant lights, slate walls, and cognac-colored leather chairs gleaming under the lamps. Every table had hand-forged knives and crystal wine glasses already set. Every entree was easily over $100. The manager led us to a long table near the center, the most visible spot. Evan had probably chosen it on purpose to show his family the world he believed he belonged to, and to make sure I blended in as quietly as possible. We sat down. Every time I was about to answer a question, Evan cut in. Mrs. Collins asked, "What did you do before urban consulting?" Evan immediately answered for me. He retired a long time ago. Just does small things. Nothing major. Claire added, soft but clear, "He likes simple things." I could feel Mrs. Collins giving me that familiar kind of look, the one wealthy people use when deciding whether someone belongs at their table. I smiled lightly. I worked in landscape design for over 4 decades. Resorts, parks, retreats. Evan cut me off openly. He means small stuff. Modern design theory is very different now. Then he raised his voice, loudly enough for 4 nearby tables to hear. He's retired, kind of outdated in design theory. The small area went silent for a beat. A couple at the next table turned their heads. A young guy behind us, phone already up, glanced over. I knew that look instantly. The look of someone deciding whether this moment could go viral on TikTok. I put my hand on the table to stay steady. If Eleanor were alive, she'd place her hand over mine and say, "Ignore them, Arthur. I love the way you live." But Eleanor was gone, and the cold edge in Evan's voice cut through my ear like ice. Mr. Collins gave a polite, "I don't want to get involved" chuckle, and Mrs. Collins asked, "Do you live alone in Tahoe? Must be very simple, right?" I replied, "I like the quiet." "And cheap, too," Evan added, softer now, but just loud enough for me to hear. I looked at Claire. She looked away. It was clear this night wasn't about family connection. It was a stress test to see if I was upscale enough to stand near them at the wedding. When the check arrived, I reached for my wallet. Evan jumped in. "Oh no, let me." But his tone wasn't generous. It was protective, as if he didn't want me revealing anything about my finances. I looked at the bill, over $300. I placed my debit card down. "I'll pay my part." Evan inhaled sharply through his teeth, annoyed. My paying disrupted the poor narrative he had crafted for me. The server swiped the card and nodded. "Approved." I saw the tiny flicker of surprise in Evan's eyes, the micro-expression of a man who expected me to refuse out of fear of spending money. The 4 of them walked ahead. I stayed a few steps behind to keep some distance. At the door, I heard Evan whisper to his parents, thinking I couldn't hear, "See? I told you. He's harmless and easy to manage." Easy to manage. No one had ever used those words for me in all 68 years of my life. Stepping outside, the trucky night air hit my face like cold needles. I saw my reflection in the glass. Old blazer, Eleanor's knitted scarf, a frame a bit thinner than last year. But what held me still for a few seconds wasn't the reflection. It was realizing that tonight confirmed one thing. Evan didn't want me to be elegant enough for the wedding. He wanted me to be a prop, moved into whichever corner he chose. But they didn't know. I created the Merrick Land Trust 7 years ago, and all of it, the land, the cabin, the lake, the forest, was already protected in a legal structure neither Claire nor Evan could touch. They thought they were managing me. In reality, I was observing them. Every word, every glance, every micro-expression. And tonight only confirmed one thing. If they wanted a war, I wouldn't avoid it. I would simply choose the timing. And that timing would not be in a dining room. It would be somewhere far more crowded. Tahoe Resort, on the wedding day itself. That night, the road from Truckee back to Lake Tahoe felt darker than usual, or maybe it was just my eyes blurring because those earlier words were still echoing in my head. Outdated, easy to manage. Don't talk about your old job, it sounds cheap. Streetlights thinned out and then disappeared, leaving only my headlights cutting a thin line through the pines, like a small incision across the rough hide of the mountain. Turning onto the dirt road up to the cabin, I switched off the radio and lowered the window a little to let the cold air rush in. The scent of pine resin, damp earth, and night lake water poured into the car, all mingling as if reminding me that some things remain unchanged, no matter how people choose to see one another. The cabin appeared behind the trees, small, stubborn, steady, moonlight climbing over the treetops and spreading a silver layer across the wooden roof, as if someone were quietly holding a lantern above it. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds in the dark, with only the sound of cooling metal and the wind dragging across the lake. For a brief moment, I wanted to start the car again, keep driving, anywhere at all, as long as I didn't have to face the question growing louder inside me. But my hand still opened the door. Gravel crunched under my boots, the same sound from the first days Eleanor and I carried each plank of lumber up here. I switched on the porch light. The warm glow touched the old wood grain, the bench where Eleanor used to drink her morning coffee, the hook where her last winter coat still hung, never worn again. I hung my blazer and the knitted scarf in my usual spot, then walked into the kitchen, my hand almost automatically reaching for the steel coffee thermos she gave me for my 50th birthday. It was worn now, a few faint scratches, but when I opened it, the scent of the morning's cold coffee lingered, like a tiny fragment of time that hadn't been swept away. I poured a little hot water in, not because I needed caffeine, but because I needed the metallic warmth to spread through my hand, a real kind of warmth, to counter the strange cold settling inside my chest. Sitting on the wooden chair by the large window facing the lake, I dimmed the lights, leaving only a single warm bulb glowing in the kitchen. Moonlight took over the rest of the cabin, laying patches of shadow and silver across the floor, walls, and table like charcoal strokes. The lake outside, from this angle, looked like a massive dark pane of glass with a thin streak of moonlight stretched across it. I remembered Eleanor standing in this exact spot, holding her coffee, saying, "Look, it's like an unfinished drawing. Every day it's different, but always itself." Her voice now lived only in memory, but the tone, the pauses, the way she emphasized always itself were so clear that sometimes I turned my head, expecting to see her standing there. I set the thermos down and pulled my old laptop closer. The password was still Claire's middle name and birth year, a habit I'd never wanted to change. The email icon lit up. In my saved mailbox, I scrolled to find a message I'd read dozens of times, but that felt different every time. The email Eleanor wrote before her final treatment. The subject line was simply, "If one day I'm no longer there." I clicked. Her words were steady, simple, but carried their own rhythm, like the way she used to walk across the cabin floor. She wrote that if one day I found myself alone in this cabin, tired from listening to the wind, sad from looking at the lake, I needed to remember 3 things. 1, you are not a burden. You are the tree that sheltered them from the rain. They may forget, but the truth does not forget. 2, keep this cabin not for money, but because this is where you'll still hear me laugh in the wind. 3, when they grow up and start fearing poverty, fearing shame, fearing judgment, there will come a time they turn the blade toward you. When that happens, don't use it as a measure of your worth. At that point, I stopped, not because I couldn't keep reading, but because the line, afraid of being poor, afraid of shame, afraid of judgment, matched uncomfortably well with everything that happened tonight. Evan was afraid people would find out his future. Father-in-law was just a retired landscape architect. Claire was afraid her friends would see this cabin and think it came from something cheap. I replayed, "Don't talk about your old job, it sounds cheap," and set it beside another sentence spoken more than 20 years ago, also from Claire's mouth, but with a completely different voice and gaze. She was 8, standing in the nursery behind the cabin, clutching my jeans, eyes shining. "Dad, you're my hero. You turn empty land into parks, lakes, and little forests." When her teacher asked the class to draw their parents' professions, Claire drew me standing in a garden, pencil in hand, surrounded by trees and water, and underneath she wrote, "My dad builds places for people to breathe." That drawing is still in the drawer of my study. The colored pencil faded, but not the meaning. Thinking back now, the distance between hero and sounds cheap isn't far in language, but in a lifetime, it is an entire chasm. And what dug that chasm? Missed dinners on her birthdays because I had to finish design deadlines, the checks I signed for her college tuition, the nights I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning polishing a project to earn a little bonus so she could afford a semester abroad in Europe. Someone dug the hole, someone watched, and the one who fell in was me. I took a sip of coffee. The bitterness was familiar, but tonight it tasted sharper. Moonlight shifted on the wall, the window frame casting a long rectangle of pale light. In that bright patch I saw my reflection, slightly rounded shoulders, silver hair, the face of a man whose future son-in-law called him outdated, whose daughter told him, "Don't talk about your old job." For the first time, I let the question slip out. Am I a burden? A burden to whom? To Claire, because my presence embarrassed her among the status she's trying so hard to climb into. To Evan, because I don't fit the perfect narrative he's constructing on Instagram and LinkedIn. Or to myself, because the money I gave away without expecting it back now stung with equal parts anger and sadness. I thought of the Merrick Land Trust, the name I chose alone after Eleanor passed. One snowy afternoon on the porch, I sat with the lawyer at the cabin's dining table. Documents spread out, my signature on each page a quiet admission that a part of life needed to be locked away to stay protected. I didn't set up the trust because I didn't trust my child. I set it up because I knew time changes people, and I didn't want a day to come when, in some panic over money, they'd do to me what I would never do to them. And yet tonight, hearing Evan say, "easy to manage," hearing Claire tell me, "don't make things hard for me," I realized the trust wasn't just protecting the land. It was standing as the last boundary, preserving what little dignity I had left. "You are not a burden," Eleanor wrote. But Eleanor wasn't here to hear what was said tonight. I closed the laptop. The soft click of the lid felt like a temporary period at the end of a sentence with no real conclusion. Outside, the lake was still flat, the moon still shining, the pines still whispering their language, one humans rarely bother to learn. The natural world didn't care whether I was elegant in the eyes of the Collins family. It only cared whether I stood through this winter and sprouted new leaves in spring. I carried the coffee thermos out to the porch. Warm metal touched my hand. Cold air touched my face. Two opposites meeting on my skin. I closed my eyes and listened to the lake lapping against the rocks. Maybe the real burden wasn't what I had done for my child, but the illusions they were trying to carry on their shoulders. And soon the wedding at Tahoe Resort would be the moment those illusions met harsh light. Not from chandeliers, but from the truth. Moonlight slid farther across the cabin roof, like someone drawing a new line on an old blueprint. I inhaled deeply, and in the cutting Tahoe cold, I told myself, this silence is not surrender. It's a step back to build momentum. While closing the laptop, I noticed an unread email sitting in the other tab. The sender was unfamiliar. Terra Invest, Public Land Research Division. Subject, Inquiry regarding preservation deeds. Tahoe Basin. I assumed it was a mistake, marked it later, then forgot about it. I didn't know that that very email would open the door to everything that happened at the wedding. 3 days after that night at Skyline Steakhouse, I drove my aging Subaru Outback down to Reno to buy the suit Claire said had to match the upscale vibe of the wedding. Highway 431 from Tahoe to the city twisted through bare hills, Nevada dust lifting in thin layers ahead of the car like memories trying to escape but failing. I rolled the window down to let cold air clear out the heaviness left by the word outdated, but it didn't help. You can wash your hands, your face, even your coat after it absorbs smoke. But you can't wash off the feeling of being someone your own child is ashamed of. Reno luxury tailor sat in a covered plaza with silver gray stone walls, the glass front reflecting my elongated silhouette like a black ink stroke. Inside was the world of people who never check price tags. Walnut wood, Italian warm lighting, crystal counters, suits hanging in precise lines, each tagged by body type. When I stepped in, the door chime rang, and the face of the sales associate, a young man with gelled hair and a thin tie, appeared with a smile that was neither friendly nor cold. It was the smile of someone trying to figure out which customer tier I belonged to. "Hello, sir," he said. "Shopping for a suit for what occasion?" "My daughter's wedding," I answered. His eyes flicked down to my hiking boots, then up to my old knit sweater. One tiny beat, very tiny, but enough for me to notice. "Right," he said again, voice slightly altered. "I'll pull a few options that fit your style." I smiled faintly. "My style?" I mean, something suitable for your age." That word struck like a cold needle. I didn't respond, just followed him into the fitting area. Rows of jackets were arranged by color: navy, charcoal, jet black, and a few unusual tones only magazine readers could name. He took out a deep navy suit, the fabric so smooth that light slid across it like water, then handed it to me. "Try this first, sir," he said. "But just so you know, we usually tailor suits for groomsmen, not often for your age category." I paused, a light sentence but sharp enough to sting the bridge of my nose. I nodded it off, knowing he didn't mean to hurt me. The world had just made comments like that feel normal. I changed into the suit. When I looked in the mirror, I flinched slightly. The suit was beautiful, but the reflection wasn't the man who once stood in the middle of a construction site, holding blueprints for the Tahoe Pines project back in 1996, nor the man who ran through winter rain to finish the lakeside park before Christmas, nor the man who carried Claire on his shoulders when she was 3, her arms spread out like she was flying through the forest. In the mirror stood a 68-year-old man with silver hair and dark circles, standing in a luxurious fitting room that felt nothing like it belonged to him. "Turn a bit to the right," the associate said, pulling the curtain aside. I turned. He adjusted the shoulders, checked the seams, then smiled the practice smile. "Looks okay, sir, but let me tweak the waist and the shoulders, since we usually tailor for younger builds." I didn't react. "How much for this one?" I asked. $950, he said. I nodded. My account wasn't poor, but it wasn't abundant either. My monthly pension was $3,400, enough for a comfortable life if it were just me in the cabin. But the cabin was never cheap. The roof had to be replaced every 6 years. The lake pump needed regular checks. The wood floors needed maintenance. And Tahoe winters always found a way to make the heating bill higher than expected. Not to mention everything I had given Claire during her college years. $28,000 per semester in tuition, then $9,200 for her exchange trip, then $6,500 for her used car, then $3,000 when she lost her job in San Francisco and needed rent money. Evan once said 2 years ago that he was investing in a tech project, and I gave him $5,000. I haven't heard a word since. People don't call those debts, but tonight, in this bright fitting room, they came back like numbers that were no longer invisible. I decided to buy the suit. I didn't like it, but I didn't want Claire to be embarrassed because her father showed up at the wedding in old clothes. I walked to the counter and pulled out my debit card. The associate looked at the card and then at me. Not in suspicion, just with the reflex of someone used to platinum credit cards, not debit. "Go ahead, swipe it," I said. He did. The machine beeped softly. The screen lit up. Approved. $950. I heard his slight breath, the sound someone makes when they realize they misjudged a person. "Thank you, sir," he said, this time with a voice that sounded real. not something taught in a training module. I nodded, took the suit bag, and walked outside. The Reno afternoon light slanted across the street, warm but cold at the same time. I stood at the curb for a moment, my hand resting on the suit bag, the scent of new fabric, drifting faintly through the nylon. But the heaviest feeling wasn't in the bag. It was in the bank alert that had just popped onto my phone. Remaining balance, $12,442.83. Not a small number, but no longer the number from the years when I worked 6 days a week and earned steady bonuses. It was the number of a man living on what he had saved over a lifetime and being treated by his own family as something outdated. I stood there in the middle of busy Reno, realizing this. It wasn't the suit that weighed on me, not the price. It was the question still circling since the cabin night. Am I a burden? The people passing me had no idea I had just bought a suit for a ceremony I was invited to, only on the condition that I not embarrass anyone. They didn't know my daughter once called me her hero. Now I am afraid I might talk about my old job. They didn't know that in just 2 days I would be placed at a table near the restroom at Tahoe Resort, in front of 200 guests. But they also didn't know something else. I wasn't going there to be treated well. I was going there to observe and to wait for the moment, a moment I had been quietly preparing for 7 years, since the day I signed the Merrick Land Trust. I drew a long breath, looked toward the distant Tahoe ridges, and stepped into my car. The late afternoon sky was washed in silver orange, the color of a light that doesn't flatter or condemn, only reveals. The wedding was getting close, and I knew. The light that day would reveal many things, but not from me, from someone else. Very different. The pre-wedding reception at Sapphire Hall in Tahoe Resort carried exactly the kind of atmosphere designed not to welcome guests, but to impress them. High wooden ceilings, warm yellow lights meant to illuminate only the people they wanted. Illuminated, soft jazz and champagne filled to the rim. I arrived early, handed over my place card, and received the number no one ever wants to see. Table 22, near kitchen passage. I walked through the central area, where the Collins family stood in a perfect crescent, smiling at everyone they deemed worthy. Claire saw me and gave the smallest nod, as if even acknowledging me in front of her new in-laws required calculation. Evan didn't even bother to hide it. He glanced at me once, then leaned toward Christopher and said loud enough for me to hear, "He showed up early. Keep him in the back section." The words landed like a discarded inventory, stamped to the chest. I reached the table 22, a spot beside the kitchen hall, where servers carried hot trays in and out nonstop. The smell of burnt butter and hot metal clinging to the air. A thick wooden pillar blocked most of the view, placed as if deliberately to cut me away from the rest of the celebration. I had barely pulled my chair out when a group of young guests swept in. Glitter dresses, slim-cut suits, the kind of people who attend parties more to record them than to speak to anyone. A blonde girl was live-streaming to tens of thousands. She panned her camera across the large seating chart at the entrance, slowly reading, "Table 22. Bride's father, Arthur Merrick." Then the camera swung straight toward the kitchen area, the exact corner where I sat. "Wait, guys, the bride's dad is sitting back here, near the kitchen. What even—" Laughter erupted from her friends. A guy said loudly enough for 3 tables to hear, "Bro, they really put the bride's dad in the service zone. That's wild." Another girl leaned into the camera, pretending to whisper, but making sure her whisper wasn't quiet at all. Probably trying to hide him. Big drama. The camera turned toward me again. I saw my own face appear on their phone screen, distorted, small, misplaced, like an object sitting where it didn't belong. I was about to stand and look for Claire when Evan appeared instantly, not to greet me, but to block my way. One hand lifted a champagne glass. The other hovered subtly in front of my chest. Polite enough to disguise it. Obvious enough for everyone nearby to understand it was meant to stop me. Arthur, he said, voice soft but engineered, to carry across 2 nearby tables. You can stay here. The back area is quiet. I looked him in the eye. I just want to say hello to Claire. Evan tilted his head and lowered his voice by exactly 1 notch, while still making sure people around could hear. Just don't mingle too much. People might mistake you for catering staff. 2 girls at the next table glanced at my shoes, then at each other, laughing. One of them covered her mouth, but not her voice. Wait, I thought he was staff. He's literally sitting by the kitchen. A middle-aged couple walked past, saw Evan blocking me, and whispered, He's probably banned from the VIP area. I heard every word. No one hid anything. No one felt the need, because I was invisible to them. I returned to table 22. The kitchen lights shone directly into my face, the kind of lighting meant for inspecting plates, not hosting guests. A server walked by, stared at me for 2 seconds, then whispered to another, Is he a guest or staff? The other replied just loud enough, If he's a guest, that's sad. The livestream group kept going. Guys, this clip is blowing up. Bride's dad shoved in the kitchen section. A guy pointed at me from across the room like pointing at an exhibit. Zoom in. Yeah, that's him. I didn't react. There was nothing to react to. Evan returned, standing behind me like a supervisor, making sure I didn't ruin the aesthetic. Remember, he said, projecting his voice just enough, don't stand up too much. Don't wander. You understand the aesthetic. I looked down at my hands, the hands that once built an entire resort in the Sierra Nevada, hands that carried Claire through snow trails, hands that held Eleanor's during her final months. Those hands, now being treated like hands that might confuse guests into thinking I belonged in the kitchen staff. But I didn't say a word. I lifted my head, looking past the rows of main tables, at Evan laughing loudly, Claire trying to look flawless, and the Collins family standing like people who believed tomorrow belonged to them. They didn't know. Tomorrow did not belong to them. And right there at table 22, surrounded by kitchen smells, harsh lights, and whispers from people who believed themselves above others, I understood one truth. They weren't diminishing me. They were diminishing themselves. And tomorrow, the light would reveal that. All I had to do was wait. Morning of the wedding, Lake Tahoe was covered in a thin layer of mist, like the last breath left behind by a cold night. I parked my car in front of Lakeview Summit Lodge, where the water lay flat like glass, reflecting the bright white resort against a pale gray sky. Rows of Mercedes, Tesla Plaids, and Porsche Macans lined up so neatly they made my old car look like a stray period in a story they were trying to write. Inside the lobby, the scent of cedar wood blended with expensive perfume, forming that unfamiliar fragrance meant only for people who know where they belong in this picture. I stepped up to the reception desk and handed over my name card. The receptionist checked the list, her polite smile unchanged, then tilted the board so I could see. Mr. Arthur Merrick, table 27, and right below it, in a smaller line, colder than the lake mist outside, Restroom corridor. No one needed to say anything. The slight flicker of awkwardness in her eyes was enough for me to understand that this was the type of seat they assigned to things they wanted hidden away without having to explain. I looked at the seating map. Table 27 sat against the wall, right at the entrance to the restroom. The 4 nearest tables all had a note. Secondary guest. None of those tables said immediate family, and none of those seats were for the bride's father. Do you need me to show you the way, sir? The receptionist asked, her voice half softening. No need, I said, though my throat couldn't hide the metallic bitterness. I turned toward the ballroom, feeling as if I were walking from the light into a shadowy corner they had chosen for me long before the ceremony began. Table 27 looked exactly as the map described. Small, pressed up against the restroom door, a secondary light shining down as if illuminating an overlooked display item. Every time the restroom door opened, a cold gust slipped out, carrying with it tile sounds, water sounds, footsteps, noises that did not belong to a wedding day. I sat down. I rested my hand on the table to steady myself when a shadow took the seat beside me. I looked up. A man in his early 50s, minimalist black suit, satin tie, a Patek Philippe, so thin it could have been paper but worth enough to buy my cabin 3 times over. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen more than a lifetime should allow. He extended his hand. "This seat is free?" "It is," I said. "Please sit." He gave a small smile, the kind of smile from someone who never needed to prove anything. "Arthur Merrick, yes?" I paused. "Yes, I'm Arthur." "I'm Sebastian," he said, his voice low and steady like the lake when there's no wind. "Sebastian Crow?" My heart skipped a beat. Sebastian Crow, environmental investor, CEO of Crow Terrinvest, the man the press calls the man who buys forests to protect them, the one who purchased over 40,000 acres of Sierra Nevada forest just to keep them out of developers' hands, a figure anyone in land, conservation, or development circles would know. I knew him, but he knew me? "You know me?" I asked. Sebastian held my gaze, tilting his head slightly as if measuring truth in every breath I took. "Arthur Merrick," he said slowly, landscape architect behind the 3 most notable lakeshore projects in Tahoe, the man who saved nearly 10 acres of forest when developers tried to clear it in 2004. "I've known of you for a long time." I didn't know what to say. Outside, the MC's voice echoed, "Guests, please take your seats. Ceremony starts in 5 minutes." Sebastian rested a hand on the table, leaning slightly closer. "I know how they're treating you," he said, glancing at the restroom corridor, "but they picked the wrong person to underestimate." I didn't understand. What was he trying to say? Sebastian adjusted his tie, lowering his voice even further. "Arthur, I didn't come for the bride. I came for a proposal I want to make to you. Something that I believe will change the direction of this entire event." I looked at him about to ask when he leaned in once more, speaking so slowly it felt like each word fell directly into my ear. "I want to talk about the Merrick Land Trust." My heart slammed once. I had never told anyone, not even Claire. No one knew the trust existed. Yet this man, with more influence than the entire Collins family combined, knew. "Arthur," he continued, "today we'll need light, and light sometimes comes from the place people try hardest to hide." I looked across the ballroom. Evan stood at the VIP table, laughing with guests. Claire posed for photos, her white dress glowing under the lights. The Collins family had no idea that the man sitting next to me was someone capable of flipping the power dynamics of any room he walked into. I thought I came here to be humiliated, but maybe I came here to begin. And they had no idea that the seat they shoved me into, the one beside the restroom, was exactly where the brightest light was about to turn on. When the orchestra prepared to play Moon River, the ballroom was still noisy, but at table 27, right next to the restroom, the air felt strangely still. Sebastian Crow sat beside me, his hands interlaced, every movement carrying the calm of someone long accustomed to living among power. I was still stunned that he knew about the Merrick Land Trust when Sebastian tilted his head, looking at me the way someone looks at a younger version of himself. "Arthur," he said slowly, "I have owed you for a very long time." I froze. "Owed me?" Sebastian nodded, and his eyes were not the eyes of a billionaire CEO. They were the eyes of a man speaking about something truly important. 35 years ago, you designed Crow Memorial Park for my father. You didn't just draw it," Sebastian said. "You walked every path and every stone step yourself. You planted the first 30 pine trees by hand. You told me, land is not just for selling. Land is for breathing. I remembered. I remembered the boy standing on a boulder, watching me hammer stakes into the ground, his eyes bright as if he were watching magic. I had forgotten, but Sebastian had not. I was 13, he continued, and you were the first person to teach me what stewardship meant. I let out a soft laugh, one full of disbelief. I didn't think you still remembered me. Remember? Sebastian looked at me and shook his head. I carried your words with me my entire life. At that exact moment, a cold beam from the ballroom lights swept across our table. It wasn't the spotlight for the stage, just a lighting tech adjusting the rig. But because our corner was normally dark, the light created a strange moment. The entire room seemed to notice the two men sitting beside the restroom suddenly lit clearer than the center tables. A few guests turned their heads. A couple stopped in the aisle. Someone whispered, "I think that's Sebastian Crow." The sound spread as quickly as smoke in a wooden cabin. Sebastian Crow at the restroom table? No way. Why is he sitting with that guy? I almost wanted to laugh. They were not terrified because of me. They were terrified because of the seat Sebastian had chosen to sit in. When they looked at me a moment ago, they saw an outdated old man. But when they saw Sebastian shake my hand, suddenly, they didn't know who I was anymore. Sebastian extended his hand openly. "Thank you for that year, Arthur." I shook his hand, and at that moment the light shifted again. The entire ballroom glanced over as if we were the opening act of the ceremony. It wasn't a spotlight, but the effect was stronger than any real spotlight. At the VIP table up front, Michael Collins, the financial brain of the Collins family, was bent over the seating plan. When he looked up and saw Sebastian sitting beside me, he shot to his feet. Without thinking, he rushed to his parents. "Mom! Dad! Sebastian Crow is sitting next to the bride's father." His voice was loud enough for 3 tables to hear. Mrs. Collins froze, her champagne glass halting midair as if she had seen a ghost. Mr. Collins whipped his head toward the restroom area, his eyes wide and unblinking. "No, no. Why would Sebastian—" Michael cut him off. "I don't know, but everyone is looking. If the press finds out he's sitting at the restroom table, then—" He didn't finish, but the panic on his face said everything. Sebastian's presence at the toilet table could ruin the perfectly curated image the Collins family had built for today. From table 27, I watched it all. Every person who had dismissed me now standing up straight, like they were trying to fix a broken script. But it was already too late. I didn't need to speak. The truth was, speaking for me, Sebastian looked at me, smiling slightly. "Seems I've accidentally caused a bit of disruption. You know they're panicking, right?" I asked. "Of course," Sebastian replied, his eyes glinting with a sharp light. "But Arthur, sometimes light has to shine exactly on the darkest corner." I stayed silent. I understood him. And for the first time in my life, the seat by the restroom wasn't a place to hide me. It became a place capable of threatening the entire hierarchy of a family that thought it could decide everyone's place. The ceremony hadn't even begun, but the reversal had. The atmosphere in the ballroom before the wedding felt like the surface of Lake Tahoe before a storm. Smooth on top, but underneath were currents everyone was trying to hide. And then the moment came, when the Collins family realized that Sebastian Crow, the CEO of Terrinvest, was sitting next to me at the restroom table, like a slap across the image they had spent an entire year constructing. Evan rushed over first, his face drained of color. Michael Collins followed right behind him, their parents trailing, all of them looking like an escort team that had just discovered their VIP guest had been seated in a storage closet by mistake. "Mr. Crow!" Evan raised his voice far above normal. I think there has been a misunderstanding. This seat—" Sebastian stood up, not fast, not flustered. He adjusted his tie, moved his water glass to the right, the way someone does after sitting in thousands of important boardrooms. When he finally faced Evan, his voice rang out clear and deliberate, and purposely not quiet. A misunderstanding? You mean this is the misunderstanding? Sebastian pointed at the sign behind me that read, Restrooms, and then pointed down at the table card that said, Arthur Merrick, bride's father, table 27. The ballroom froze. You, Sebastian said louder, making at least 5 tables turn, hid the bride's father here, beside the restroom? Michael tried to laugh. No, not hide, just a placement issue. Sebastian sliced straight through his sentence. You think this man, he turned toward me, his hand resting on my shoulder like he was reasserting the worth they tried to erase, is not aesthetically fit to sit with your family? Evan's face bleached pale. No, not at all. This is just... You, Sebastian said, his voice turning razor sharp, think wealth automatically equals dignity? Think a bank balance lets you decide who sits where? An older woman at table 18 exclaimed loudly enough to ripple across the room, Shameful! Someone else said, Why would they treat the bride's father like that? At the next table, a young guest started live streaming. Holy! The CEO of Terra Invest is calling out the Collins family at the wedding. Evan tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Mr. Crow, perhaps we can talk privately. Sebastian gave a small laugh, but it was the kind of laugh someone makes right before shutting a very large door in someone's face. Privately? After you humiliated the bride's father in front of hundreds of guests? After you let the entire ballroom see him like he was meant to be hidden? No, we will talk here. The ballroom lights shifted, the lighting tech testing them, sending a beam directly onto Sebastian and me. People turned, more phones lifted. Evan began to sweat. Michael whispered, He is ruining our wedding. But Sebastian was not finished. He clasped his hands behind his back and stared directly at Evan. Evan Collins. Evan swallowed. Yes? 2 months ago, Sebastian pronounced each word clearly, I approved an investment of $350,000 into your firm. Evan nodded slightly, his voice shaking. I'm very grateful. Grateful? Sebastian tilted his head. Do you want to know what I am grateful for? Evan stood frozen. I am grateful, Sebastian said, to people who do not bury their future father-in-law in the dark. The room erupted. A wave of whispers rolled through the ballroom. Someone at table 12 covered their mouth. He is talking about the bride's father. Another whispered, Oh my God, Evan is done. Sebastian shifted a half step to the left so the light hit him fully. I do not invest in people who think human dignity is measured by seating charts. I do not invest in men who hide the bride's father beside a restroom. Then he dropped the final sentence, each word landing like a stone. I am withdrawing. The entire investment. Evan looked as if his legs collapsed. His face drained white as if every drop of blood had been removed. Michael whispered, Evan, stand up. Do not fall on the floor in front of the guests. A live streamer shouted, Oh my God, he just pulled $350K. Live at the wedding, guests across 5 nearby tables turned to look at Evan, at the Collins family, at me, and then they looked at Sebastian like they were witnessing someone redirect the path of a storm. I had not spoken a single word, but I did not need to. The truth was speaking for me, and for the first time the entire evening, they were the ones standing in the position of being seen, the position they had used all night to push me down. The ballroom had never been this silent, and this was only the beginning of what was coming. The ballroom of Lakeview Summit Lodge had never been this chaotic. The music was still playing, but no one was listening. The champagne glasses were still full, but no one lifted them. The lights were still shining, but now those lights had become the cruelest thing in the room, because they illuminated every face twisted between shame and panic. And right in the center of that room, Evan's father, Robert Collins, exploded like a firework in the middle of a wedding. Evan, what the hell have you done? His voice carried across nearly 10 tables, loud enough to freeze the entire ballroom. You told me everything was under control. You told me he—" Robert pointed straight at me, his hand shaking with rage. "Was harmless, poor, easy to manage." Guests began whispering. Someone covered their mouth. Another shook their head in disbelief. Claire stood frozen, her makeup starting to smear from tears. She looked at Evan, at her in-laws, then at me, her eyes like someone waking up in a burning building with no idea where the exit was. Patricia Collins, Evan's mother, grabbed her husband's sleeve, trying to pull him down. "Robert, stop! People are watching!" "Let them watch!" Robert shoved her hand away so hard her jade bracelet hit the table with a sharp crack. "I want them to see this stupidity." A guest at table 14 blurted out, "Oh my God, this is live streaming on TikTok?" Across the ballroom, Michael Collins was flushed red, his hand shaking as he held his phone because at least 3 people were live streaming near him. Evan, backed into a corner, tried to maintain composure, but fear cracked his voice apart. "Dad, I didn't know Sebastian Crow would see." "Didn't know?" Patricia spun toward Evan and screamed into his face. "You chose the seating. You told us about him." Her voice broke with fury. "Evan, you told us he was nothing. You told us he was a nobody." Claire collapsed into sobs. She cried while speaking through trembling breaths. Everything is falling apart. Falling apart." Evan snapped at her. "Falling apart? Whose fault is that? Your father ruined everything, just like he ruins every room he walks into." The shout tore through the ballroom like a blade. A few guests turned toward me, not because they believed him, but because they were stunned he dared say that at his own wedding. Claire stepped back 2 steps, her hands shaking uncontrollably. That sentence dropped into her heart, like a stone falling onto a frozen lake. "Evan, what did you just say?" "I said it because it's true," Evan screamed, his whole body trembling with panic and rage. "Your father ruined everything. He made Sebastian pull the investment. He humiliated my family. Evan, enough." It was the first time I spoke. Not loud, not harsh, just enough to split the room in half. One half chaos, one half silent. But Evan, unraveling, kept charging like someone unhinged. "He ruins everything. A loud crash rang out. Someone dropped a tray of glasses onto the floor. A domino effect followed. Guests standing, cameras lifting, whispers exploding like a broken hive. A young girl live streaming shouted, "Oh my God, I got everything. Evan Collins is blaming the bride's father in the middle of the wedding." The video spread instantly. 2 seconds later, a notification ping echoed from someone's phone. "The clip is going viral. 8,000 views in 40 seconds. Robert Collins shifted from rage to genuine fear. He grabbed Evan's arm. "Shut up. Do you understand this will destroy our family's reputation? Who will want to work with us after this?" Patricia Collins held her head. "Oh God," all over a seat. An elderly guest stood up and tapped his silver spoon on his glass, his voice clear and stern. "Shame on all of you." Every eye turned toward him. "A father," he pointed directly at me, "deserves respect, no matter what he has." A wave of nods spread across nearly 5 tables. A woman said, "They treated him like he was invisible. No wonder Sebastian got angry." Evan suddenly gasped for air, like someone realizing the fire had reached his feet, and there was nowhere left to run. He turned to Claire, tears and fury tangled on his face. "Say something! Defend me!" Claire shook her head, tears falling onto her wedding dress. "Defend you? From what? From your own actions, Evan?" Evan reached out as if to grab her hand, but she stepped back, avoiding him. "Don't touch me." And in that moment, the entire ballroom understood the wedding had cracked from the inside. I stood still, saying nothing else. I didn't need to. Because right then, everything they had done to me was turning back to choke them, all because of a seat they believed they had the right to assign. And table 27, the restroom table they used to humiliate me, was becoming the grave of their family's image, an internal collapse, echoing like wood snapping inside an old house. 3 days after the chaos at Lakeview Summit Lodge, the streets of Tahoe City were soaked in light rain, and Evan Collins was soaked in something heavier. Disaster. I sat in the wooden cabin by the lake, the window cracked open, the damp pine smell drifting in, and each notification on my phone dropped like raindrops. Evan's firm loses. Redwood Capital Partnership. Terra Invest officially pulls $350,000 commitment. Collins and Park under financial review. I read each line quietly, the way someone watches a film they're not in but somehow already knows every scene. That morning, Redwood Capital, Evan's largest partner, sent an email terminating their contract immediately, citing reputational risk and questionable disclosure practices. Half an hour later, a smaller investment fund announced they were withdrawing. By noon, Evan's company had a construction project in Reno frozen due to suspected financial irregularities from before. Not because of me, not because of Sebastian, but because Evan opened his mouth at the wedding and destroyed himself. The video of him shouting, "Your father ruined everything," had reached nearly 1 million views. And once the internet saw someone's real nature, financial contracts recognize the one thing they fear most, a man who cannot control his emotions. That was the real reason the funding collapsed. No second party needed. That afternoon, I went to the law office of Langford and Ames in Truckee. An old wooden house converted into a legal office, walls lined with forest land maps and lake landscape paintings. My attorney, Evelyn Ames, set a thick folder on the pine desk. "Arthur, I've finished drafting Merrick Environmental, as you requested." I opened the first page. "Irrevocable." "Yes," she said, "but I need to be clear. In America, nothing is impossible to challenge. However," she smiled slightly, "with this structure, they can almost never overturn it." Evelyn explained each layer of protection. The Trust core assets are categorized as environmental preservation assets, forest land, lakefront, conservation rights, which fall under a designation notoriously difficult to contest. The entire trust was notarized, created while I was fully competent, with an independent attorney certifying no coercion, and with 2 non-family witnesses. "They can try to sue," she said, "but it won't go anywhere. This structure is extremely strong. Ironclad." I asked the question that had lived in me for 3 days. "And Evan? And Claire?" She slid a thinner document toward me. Amendment to Beneficiary Exclusion. Inside was the sentence I requested. "Evan Collins and Claire Collins, née Merrick, are excluded from all current and future benefits of the Merrick Environmental Trust." Evelyn looked at me, her expression not judgment, but the understanding of someone who had seen too many families tear themselves apart from the lack of boundaries. "Arthur," she said softly, "you're not doing this to get revenge. You're doing this to protect what you spent a lifetime building." I nodded. I felt no victory, no satisfaction. Only the feeling of closing a door that should have been closed long ago. But I had hesitated because fathers believe what fathers always want to believe. Evelyn handed me a pen. "Sign here, and the trust takes effect today." I signed. The pen moved smoothly across the paper, each stroke like engraving the new boundary of my life. When I finished, Evelyn said a sentence I will never forget. "From this moment on, no one can touch your land. No one." I stepped out of the office just as the rain stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a patch of sky as blue as torn cloth. I stood on the wooden steps, looking at the road leading into the forest. No noise, no apologies, no one running after me. Only silence, the kind no longer sad, but weighted with the finality of a door just closed, and the sense that another door was about to open. That afternoon in Tahoe had the kind of light that only the final days of summer carry. A thin layer of gold spread over the lake as if someone had brushed on a soft coat of paint, gentle and quiet enough that you could hear the ticking of the clock inside the cabin. I was sorting the documents of the Merrick Environmental Trust when I heard a car stop on the dirt road outside. It was not the engine sound of Evan's car, I knew instantly, but the small, weak hum of a cheap sedan, like the ones you see in the parking lot of the Truckee supermarket, where hourly workers park. I stepped to the door. Claire was standing there. No makeup, no designer shoes, no fur coat. She once bragged was more expensive than your cabin, Dad. Just Claire, the girl who once ran around this shoreline with a red plastic boat, who used to call me the hero with the hard hat, who once said she would build a world as beautiful as the one you built, Dad. But now her eyes were sunken, her shoulders slumped, her hands trembling, as if every step she took onto my porch carried the weight of all the years she had walked away from me. Dad, her voice caught like it had snagged on a thin mountain wind. I'm ashamed. She lifted her head, her eyes red. I used to think love meant building an image, making people believe I belonged to a fancier world. I thought I had to trade you to be accepted. I looked at her. No anger, no blame. Just the silence a father holds when he sees his child lose herself without realizing it. Claire, I said slowly, every word touching the floor of the room, you lost yourself, long before you lost your father. The sentence hit her straight in the chest. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she broke down crying for the first time in 10 years, not the angry kind, not the demanding kind, but the kind of cry of someone who looks at themselves and sees a frightening emptiness. She sat on the step, her head bowed, her hands covering her face. The Tahoe wind drifted over, lifting a few messy strands of her hair, carrying that cold lakeshore scent she had stayed away from for too long. Dad, I'm sorry. I let Evan decide what our relationship should be. I let him turn your entire life into something he could manage. I was foolish enough to think status mattered more than the man who raised me. She reached into the pocket of her worn sweater, not the $800 coat she once wore, and placed an envelope in my hand. I looked down, a stack of money, not much, but each bill was folded neatly, the way someone gathers the pieces of kindness they once dropped. This is the money you gave me, she said. I remember all of it, every dollar, tuition, car repairs, the money Evan said he would pay back. I can't repay everything, but this is what I can repay while I'm working extra shifts. I want to start over with you, not just with words. I tightened my hand around the envelope, not because of the money, but because for the first time in years, Claire stood in front of me not to ask, not to justify, but to open a door she had slammed shut herself. The lake wind made the surface ripple with a small circle of waves. The late day light fell across Claire's face, catching each tear on her cheeks. It was no longer the silence of someone being pushed away, but of two people finding each other again after many mistakes. Claire, I said softly, I never wanted you to be perfect. I only wanted you to be yourself. She looked straight at me, her eyes no longer avoiding mine. Dad, am I still your daughter? That question, that one question I knew she had carried for months but never dared to say, hit the deepest part of me. I placed my hand on her shoulder, not firm, not instructive, just the touch of a father finally seeing his daughter clearly again. You never stopped being my daughter. She cried again, but these were the tears of someone being forgiven without needing to beg for another chance. In the distance, Lake Tahoe reflected a sky turning pale purple. The waves rolled gently as if the entire lake exhaled, the same way I did. Claire rested her head on my shoulder for a long moment. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt empty. And for the first time, I understood that awakening does not begin when someone says they are sorry. It begins when they choose to fix themselves before fixing the relationship. The surface of Lake Tahoe in the early morning always has a kind of beauty that is hard to put into words. Not loud, not showy, just a fragile layer of light, like the day's first breath spread over the still water. After weeks of chaos, betrayal, collapse, and awakening, I stood on the cabin porch, both hands buried in my coat pockets, watching that light stretch across the lake. It was so quiet I could hear my own shoulders finally drop after months of tension. Behind me, the cabin door opened softly. Sebastian stepped out, still in his simple black coat, carrying the calm of someone who never needs to prove anything. "Ready, Arthur?" he asked. "Yes," I answered, and this time it wasn't just a reply, it was the truth. We were about to sign the partnership agreement for the Truckee Community Greenway, the community park the town had waited for 3 years, but never had the budget to build. I thought the final years of my life had already drifted away from drawings, contour lines, soil depth notes, and waterline markings. But Sebastian had said a sentence I couldn't refuse. "You designed the world I grew up in. Let me help you design what you leave for the next generation." His car stopped on the dirt road beside the cabin. Through the window I saw his brown leather blueprint tube, the one he carried carefully as if it wasn't simply a project, but a piece of memory he wanted to preserve in its original form. The Greenway project would use funds from the Merrick Environmental Trust, the same Merrick Land Trust I created after Eleanor passed, now amended, notarized, reviewed by independent counsel, and nearly impossible to overturn. And now that trust had a new force behind it. Sebastian had committed $12 million to build the entire core infrastructure, the trails, the wooden bridges, the water-efficient irrigation system, and the native plant conservation zone. He didn't talk about the money, didn't mention reputation, didn't ask to have his name attached to any plaque. He just said, softly as a breeze crossing the lake, "My money, but your vision." And in that moment, standing before the wooden cabin with the contract on the table and Greenway printed in bold on the first page, I understood there are things people cannot take from you, not even when they try to place you next to a restroom to do it. Speaking of Claire, the cabin door opened again. She stood there, hair tied back, holding her mother's old metal coffee flask, the one she once called embarrassing. "Dad, take this. Mom liked when you used it," she said softly, but with a seriousness in her eyes. "You sure?" I asked. She nodded. "I'm starting over. A different life. No Evan. No image. No debts. I want to rebuild from here." No tears this time. No theatrics. Just someone who had hit the bottom and was climbing back up on her own feet. Online, the video of the wedding chaos had surpassed 2.7 million views. Not because people love drama, but because some moments become lessons for an entire generation. In the video, Evan screamed, "Your father ruins every room he walks into." But that very scene made the internet say, it wasn't the father who ruined the room. It was the people obsessed with status exposing themselves. Sebastian sent me the most notable comments. I didn't read them all, didn't need to. What I needed was right in front of me. Claire was stitching what had torn, not tearing it further. When we got into the car, Claire stood on the steps, looking toward the lake, shielding her eyes from the light. "Dad," she called, "when you're done with your meeting, I want to sit with you on the porch. We don't have to say anything. Just look at the lake." "Good," I said. "I'll be back before sunset." The car rolled forward, turning onto the winding road toward Truckee. The lake's light reflected through the window, scattering thin, shimmering lines across the dashboard. Sebastian slowed slightly, as if giving me one more moment to take it in. "You see it?" he asked, eyes still on the lake. "See what?" "The Tahoe light. It's honest. It doesn't hide anything. It reflects exactly the truth people try to bury." I looked at the lake one last time before the tree line closed around us, and I understood I had traveled a long, hard circle, through humiliation, through envy, through the cowardice of people who once called me family, only to return to the one place that had never betrayed me, the light on the lake. And that day, on the cold mountain road of Tahoe, I whispered the conclusion this journey had led me to. The light on the lake hides nothing. It only reflects the truth people try to hide. If you're reading these final lines, thank you, truly, for walking with me to the end of this journey. Not everyone has the patience for a story with long silences and wounds hard to name. And if any word in this story touched you, even just an image, a brief sadness, or something that felt a little like your own life, leave a simple as a way of saying, I understand. I'm here. That's how I'll know that somewhere beyond this screen, there is someone who understands, someone who feels this too, someone who has also stood in the cold, honest light of truth like I have.